Good evening to teacher and good evening to everyone. So today our team gonna present you from chapter 5 to chapter 8. There are 6 group members and this is our content. For the first one, summaries, I'm gonna take first. I'm gonna respond to that. And the second one, plot is for Kudara. Character analysis is for Okchan Kuchir. And for the vocabulary, it's for King Chandan. For the reflection, it belongs to Yim Sujita. And the last one, figure of speech. The person can respond is Yi Suwan. And let's move. Summaries. Chapter 5, Mr. Collins proposes twice. Mr. Mrs. Bennett invited the whole Bingley family to visit Longbourn. So everybody was joining the party there. And there are a lot of people who are joining together. And Mrs. Bennett feeling very satisfied to convene that in 3 to 4 months, Jan would marry to Bingley. But the thing is not like what he expected. And Mr. Colleen asked Mrs. Bennett for permission to speak privately to Elisabeth for some reasons. And Mr. Collins proposed to Elisabeth that he said that he would love to be with Elisabeth for the future of life, or to be a partner of her partner of life. So he asked her to accept the proposal, but Elisabeth did not accept what he asking for. So she accuses not to accept his proposal, and she said like she is like it's impossible for her to accept the proposal of Mr. Collins. So Mr. Collins was crying, and he said he's crying for Elisabeth, and he hoped and he expect that Elisabeth would accept for who he is, because he have everything. He is rich. He has like a people with fortune to have everything if you compare to Elisabeth Bingley. And as he mentioned in the book, like because her father is not rich as well, and if Elisabeth going to marry with Mr. Collins, then everything would be paid off for her to marry, so that she doesn't have to pay for anything. And he promised that he believed in a good life. He have houses, he have career, and he have money, so that he can spend easily. That's how the boy feel like that's the success and that all the girl need. But sometimes those things are not true. Not every girl will get all those things. There are something else to consider. There are something else to accept as a partner in life. So the next part is Mr. Begin. After asking Elisabeth, it's not success. He is changing his mind. He's moving to another woman, and that before that, her mom, which is Mrs. Bennett, asking Elisabeth, best friend, her name is Lucas, to prevent or to persuade Elisabeth to accept Mr. Collins proposal, but she doesn't know that Miss Lucas also wants to be with Mr. Collins for herself. Let's move to the next part. So Elisabeth, however, determined not to marry to Mr. Collins, and at the end of that, Mrs. Bennett was obliged to accept the fact that Elisabeth will not marry to Mr. Collins, and she will not be the Mrs. Collins. So Mr. Collins Mr. Collins did write that Elisabeth had what had not accepted his proposal, so he turned his forward to look at her friend, which is Lucas, to consider as her life partner or to be Mrs. Bennett. I mean to be Mrs. Collins. And if we're talking about Miss Lucas, her plan is to encourage Mr. Collins to transfer his attention on her, not on her friend. And if you consider this part, guys, it's not really easy. Like one of your best friend would um would take like even though Elisabeth did not love Mr. Collins, but which is if it's other people and the friend which is not close, it's okay. You will not feel any thinking, any pain or any hurt or some surprising feeling. But this one is your close friend, which is Lucas. She have attention to get the Mr. Colleen to be with her or for her. So let us see the reason why she have to take Mr. Collins as her life partner, though she's a good friend of Elisabeth. Why she have to do that? And this is some reason that they show in the book. They said like she did not think highly of men of Mavit, but she had once always attention to Mavit. It means she doesn't care is it Mavit happy or not happy, but she is thinking that she wants to be Mavit. And other thing is because she's a well-educated woman and she have a low income, so she had to find a life partner which is help her out, or it will show that um she is on other position like if you are 20. And the book also mentioned that she's now 27. It's so she lacking of beautiful. I mean she's lacking of beauty and she is her attraction a little bit lost. So this is the fear of women actually when we are turning to 25 to 20. When we are 25, that's feel okay, but when we are 26, upper than that, we feel something else, not secure, not we feel not safe at all. So as what she mentioned, that she felt that she was lucky to have found a husband. So she's lucky to have Mr. Collins to be her husband. Let's move to the next part. And going to chapter 6, Elisabeth visits Mr. and Mrs. Collins. Spending Christmas in Longbourn, Mrs. Bennett was trying to complain how she felt the suffering that she had. Crying and explained to her relative, to her best friend in the party, said that she her two daughters was almost to get married, but then that's gone. Everything was nothing, and everything was just empty at all. Nothing happened. So both of their kids, both of their daughters, Elizabeth and Jan, did not get married. Going to Mrs. Guddins, who had noticed that Mr. William was very frequent visitor that Elizabeth spoke admiringly. So this woman, she observed that the boy, which Mr. Vikkam, really tried to talk to Elizabeth. So her aunt was warning to her nephew that like he's a young man which is full of attraction, interesting man. But sadly, the thing is, sadly he's a poor boy or no fortune at all. So and she said that you are a sensible girl. So she said this to Elizabeth. She want Elizabeth to think again and again, like um to be a life partner. But Elizabeth replied in a polite way. She said like, Aunt, do not worry. I will take care of myself and Mr. will come too. I will be in love with him. If if that if that can be, she will not let that happen. It means she tried to tell her aunt that that thing would not happen between her and Mr. Vikkam. So, so let's move to the next one. The day of Mr. Collins' wedding soon arrived. Mrs. Bennett had to watch Carlos Lucas become Mrs. Collins. It was arranged that Elisabeth would accompany Mr. William Lucas and Mary. So her friend was asking her to accompany Sir William and Lucas around the wedding, also to accompany Miss Marian. Let's move to the next part. Ladies, Catherine giving her option without any fear or contraction, without thinking of other feelings. She share her ideas. She telling like the things she had to say without consider like there might be somebody who hurt by her word or somebody who hurt by her by the some sentences that is top, because the question is so deep, like it's too personal, like asking for education, asking for family doing, how is the father income, and this is so personal, which just make Elisabeth did not believe love. And going back to look at Mr. To Colonel's Fitzwilliam had persuaded Elisabeth to play some music, and he go and sit down, and she sat down at the piano. Down when she started playing, Mr. Darcy went to stand in front of the piano where he had a good view of the face. So it's exciting. And like for me, if that happened, I really feel shy because like a man's looking at the lady, which is like full of. In the book, they said he's express his feeling, he's express his like the way that he looked, the way that the eyes that looking at Elisabeth. So during the time, Elisabeth said like, "Are you trying to frighten me?" And then he smiled, and then she said, "I was not afraid of that." And everything was just smile, and she just playing the piano. The visit was repeated twice a week, but it was still another entertainment in Hanford. Elisabeth had a pleasant conversation with books. Also, she loved to see the gardens and seeing the gardens, gardening by the man, and it's fresh. They're full of fresh air, and she feels relaxed to see those gardens. So people spending time chatting, having fellowship with the ladies, especially the ladies, they have their own fellowship, and for the other entertainment. Let us move to the next part. Chapter 7, Darcy proposed marriage. So who does he propose to? Let us see who and how. So Elisabeth observed both Mr. Darcy and Mr. Collins' goodness called regularly at the rectory, with the place where they always or often meet. It was obvious that Colonel Pete William come because he enjoyed talking with the ladies. So Elisabeth observed that he's enjoyed talking with the people there, especially the ladies. And she thinking of, she realized someone else, because Mr. Darcy, he's kind of a person who is not really interesting, not really interesting in conversation, and like she feel like she's not involved in the party, but he's there too. But it was more difficult to understand, yeah, why Mr. Darcy came. She did not often speak. He seldom appeared interesting in conversation. Even Charlotte who observed Mr. Darcy closely, was not sure whether he loved Elizabeth or not. So not just Elizabeth herself, but also somebody else who observed, but they cannot know. They cannot. I mean, say it out. Hey, this guy love Elizabeth. This guy not really love Elizabeth or not really interesting in her at all. So the next one is the conversation of Elizabeth and Mr. Fitzwilliams. And during the time there was some morning, both of them are walking in the gardens and they have a small talk. And Mr. Fitzwilliams said he's a young son, he's a younger son in the family, and he won't inherit the father's fortune, so he shall never be rich or independent as his brother, like Mr. Darcy, because Mr. Darcy is an independent people. A younger son doesn't have a free choice when marrying. When marrying, he cannot afford to marry a girl with no future at all. So she had to marry to a person who is rich. And the bad thing is that she cannot afford. It means he cannot have money to marry by himself with the rich people. And Mr. Darcy getting up, walking about the room. Elizabeth was surprised to see Mr. Darcy. And that moment, Mr. Darcy just sat down in a silent way for a few minutes, and he just walked forward to Elizabeth, which made Elizabeth feel a little bit strange. And that time, Elizabeth just stayed in a silent way and waited for Mr. Darcy to say something. And that's what he said. He said to Elisabeth, I cannot conquer my feeling. I cannot conquer my feeling. You must follow me. Okay, I read this again. I cannot conquer my feeling. You must follow me to tell you how fondly I admire and I love you. Oh, this time Mr. Darcy really expressed his feeling that he cannot keep it anymore. I have to tell you. And then after he's expressing his feeling, expressing his himself that he loved Elisabeth. While talking, he tell him what happened in his mind and what's going on. Why do he have to hide this thing? And after knowing those things, Elisabeth lost her pity but get mad, or she feel angry at him so much. But while waiting patiently, she tried to control herself not to be mad or to get angry. So she just calmed down herself and going to breathe, take some breath and continue to listen. At the end of describing the strength of his love for her, which is in spite of all his attempts, he had been unable to conquer the human reason and common sense. Finally, he asked for the hand to marry. After explaining, after trying to tell everything, she cannot convince to get the hand of Elisabeth. Yet, maybe there's something more. Let us see. I have no wish to deny that that's what Mr. Darcy said. I have the wish to deny that I did everything could be separate them. Because during this time, Elisabeth was sad and mad at him because she thinking like Mr. Darcy trying to separate Jan from Mr. Bingley, which is her sister, and that's what makes Jan so sick and sad, and she's like, yeah, as you see the first chapter, you know the thing, and after his explanations, he told the reason why he doesn't want Jan to be with his friend, because he said to prevent his friend from marrying her sister because the terrible choice his shameless confessions and what he had done to separate Jan and Bingley. It's cruelly towards Bingham soon to move any pity she might have felt for him. And let us move to chapter 8. Elisabeth learns more about Darcy's explanations. Elisabeth had still not recovered from the surprise of Mr. Darcy's proposal yet, feeling in the need of exercise and get some fresh air so that she can relax and she'll feel better. In order, so in that case, she tried to avoid or try to hide from Mr. Darcy, but cannot because the Mr. Darcy's attention is to wait for Elisabeth. She had to meet her to give an envelope, and that envelope, and in that envelope, it's, there are explanations. There are like some confession that he have, and the first one is that the first was that I had to separate Mr. Bingley from your sister in spite of their natural affections. And the second one was that I have destroyed Mr. Vikkam's chance of future wealth and happiness in spite of my father's honorable promise to him. I hope that you will no longer blame me for either or for this offense. When you have read the explanation which follow, if I am fast to describe feeling which often you, I can only say sorry and please listen to my explanation, which is you have no intention at all. And she was astonished to discover that after reading that, she's astonished to discover that Mr. Darcy was capable of any sort of apology. It was with a strong prejudice, prejudice against anything he might say that he began reading his explanation of what had happened at Netherfield, and at first she was too angry with him to threaten him with a just stick. And how prejudiced, that's what Elisabeth thought to herself. I who have always been so proud of my ability to judge people, that pride led me blindly into making a stupid mistake. That she's kind of complained to herself, why did she judge somebody, which is Mr. Um, Darcy in this way without listening to any reason, without thinking or without consider deeper than that. She told to her sister about Mr. Darcy's proposal of marriage, though she only talked or shared the story to Jan because she can share everything and she can tell everything to Jan without any fear or without any concern. But if he talked to her that would be impossible, and they would feel like it's not proper. He might think that it's kind of a full or stupid thing. So this show that it is good to have somebody which is the own sister to talk with, to share the story with. Though Jan is not feeling like really happy to hear this thing, but she have to accept and be happy as her sister explained to her.
So first of all, I would like to pay my higher respect to our lecturer and let's say a very good evening to classmates. So to begin with my presentation today, I would like to introduce myself first. My name is Darat, and after you have know about the summary from chapter 5 to chapter 8 of the story Pride and Prejudice, so now let's move to my point, that is about the plot. So don't waste the time anymore. Now let's start all together. Plot is about the literary elements that used to describe the structures of a story. It shows about the arrangements of the events and actions within a story. Actually, there are 5 elements in the plot. The first one is exposition. Second one is about the racing action. Third one's climax. Fourth one is about the falling action, and the last one is resolution. Exposition. Exposition is referred to the start of the story, and it is usually introduced about the settings and as well as about the character in the story. And about the resting action is about the series of conflicts and crises in the story that lead to the climax. And climax is about the turning points, the most intense moment, either mentally and in action. And falling action is all of the action which follow the climax. And about the resolution is referred to the last part of the plot that conclude the falling action by revealing or suggesting the outcome of the conflicts. So now let's move to the next point. It is about the exposition of the story Pride and Prejudice from chapter 5 to chapter 8. The next day, Mr. Collins asked permission from Mrs. Bennett to speak privately to Elisabeth intentionally to propose a marriage to Elisabeth. Actually, he has been rejected by Elisabeth, and because of Elisabeth rejected the love from Mr. Collins, her mother, Mrs. Bennett, is very angry with Elisabeth so much, and especially she persuaded her husband, Mr. Bennett, to speak to Elisabeth. But however, Mr. Bennett followed Elisabeth's decision. And after the rejection of marriage from Elisabeth, Mr. Collins turned his courtship to Carles, who is Elisabeth's friend. And about 2 weeks later, there is a news that Mr. Bingley moved to London to stay there for the whole winter. Because of this news, it made Jane feel upset, feel unhappy, and Elisabeth comfort her sister. That is about the exposition of the story. And about the next point, it is about the racing action. The following Monday, Mrs. Bennett had the pleasure of receiving her brother and his wife, who come as usual to spend Christmas at Longbourn. A few months passed. It is the time for Elisabeth to visit Mr. and Mrs. Collins, as he is invited in Hertford. There is a Lady Catherine Great Park on one side of the road. There is a message from the Lady Catherine inviting them to join the dinner at Rosing Park the next day. Mr. Darcy is also there as well. They have dinner, and Elisabeth has been asked to play piano, something like that. Elisabeth usually have a conversation with Colonel. He mentioned Mr. Darcy to Elisabeth about his goodness and as well as about his generosity. That is about the racing action. Climax the next day, Elisabeth is sitting in the room alone writing a letter to Jane. At that time, Elisabeth was very surprised that Mr. Darcy went to visit her alone. After that, they both have a conversation. They both have a long conversation to each other. Mr. Darcy confessed his love to Elisabeth. He tells her how he content with her, and because of this, it makes Elisabeth blush and angry with Mr. Darcy. And finally, Elisabeth rejected the love from Mr. Darcy. And the reason why Elisabeth rejected the love or the request of Mr. Darcy, because of Mr. Darcy terrible pride, his shameless confessions of what he has done, and his cruelty toward Mr. Vikkam, and especially she thought that Mr. Darcy not respect to her family, and as well as make her sister broken heart. That is about the climax of the story. And about the next point, it is about the falling action. The next morning, Elisabeth had still not recovered from surprise of Mr. Darcy's proposal to her. And at that time, Elisabeth was astonished to see Mr. Darcy at Lady Catherine Park. And about the resolution of the story, Elisabeth got a letter from Mr. Darcy at Lady Catherine's house. After Elisabeth got the letter from Lady Catherine's house, she opens and began to read the letter. That is all about the explanation of the confusion between his relationship and Mr. Vikkam, and the reason why he had separated Mr. Bingley from Jane with his comment on her family behavior. And after Elizabeth read the letter already, it make her feel regret about the judgment she has toward Mr. Darcy. And on Saturday's morning, Elizabeth said goodbye to her friends, Kaloluska, and it was pleasant to be at home again. When Elizabeth and Jane were alone, she told her sister about Darcy's proposal on marriage. So I think that is all for my point. So thank you everyone for your pay attention on my presentation. Thank you.
And after you know about the summary and plot, now let's move to my part. But before we go to the main point, I would like to introduce myself first. My name is Uchankunthia and I am responsible for character analysis that based on chapter 5 to chapter 8. And here is the first character, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. Mr. Bennett is the head of Bennett family and he is a person that follows his daughter's decision. For example, when Elisabeth decided not to marry Mr. Collins, he did not force her, but he followed her decision. And Mrs. Bennett. Mrs. Bennett is Mr. Bennett's wife, and she is a person that lacks of social correctness. And she also wants her daughter to marry rich men. And moreover, during this chapter, she feels a bit disappointed with Carlos because they think Carlos is stole Mr. Collins from Elisabeth. And the next character is Jane Bennett. Jane Bennett is the oldest daughter of Bennett family and she is a kind of optimistic person. She always thinks positive toward every person, even is Carles Bingley that try to warn her that she is not suitable for Mr. Bingley, but she still thinks positive toward her. And she is a good listener for Elisabeth because every time Elisabeth has something or knows something, she always told her, and Jane always listened to Elisabeth everything without any complaint. And another character is Elisabeth Bennett, or sometimes she is called Lizzie by her family. She is the second daughter of Bennett family, and she is a kind of judgmental person that sometimes she judge person too fast, which bring her misjudge. That, for example, she misjudged Mr. Darcy and Mr. Vikkam. And she really loved her older sister Jane, that she always told her every secret. And another character is Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner. Mr. Gardiner is Mrs. Bennett's brother and he is a kind of sensible and gentleman. And Mrs. Gardiner is Mr. Gardiner's wife and she is a kind of intelligent and elegant woman. She is like Bennett's daughter, especially Jane and Elisabeth, that she is always bring her to visit or to stay with at London. And another character is Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy is Mr. Bingley's friend and he is a wealthy man and kind of proud person, and he tried to separate Jane and Mr. Bingley during this chapter, and he could overcome his pride by he proposed the marriage to Elisabeth, and he is a kind and intelligent person. And another character is Colonel Fitzwilliam. He is Mr. Darcy's cousin and he is about 30 years old. According to the story, they describe Colonel as he is not handsome, but he is a gentleman. And he has the admirable manner that he can get along very well with ladies. And another character is Georgiana Darcy. Georgiana Darcy is Mr. Darcy's younger sister. She is beautiful and elegant, but she had been fooled by Mr. Vikkam, and she is an ideal sister-in-law that Miss Caroline Bingley wants. And another character is Lady Catherine de Bourgh. She is a widow and she is Mr. Darcy's aunt. And according to the story, they describe that she is a kind of tall and light woman and she has the self-safety and proud personality. And another character is Anne the Boar. She is Lady Catherine the Boar's daughter, and she is small and thin. And she is a kind of ill-looking lady. And according to the story, they also told that she spoke very little and only whisper. And the next character is Mr. Carles Bingley. He is Mr. Darcy's friend, and he is also a rich man, and he is kind of easygoing, which means that he can get along very well with every person. And he is easy to persuade. For example, when Mr. Darcy and his sister persuade him to go to London, he could agree easily. And then another character is Miss Caroline Bingley. Miss Caroline Bingley is Mr. Bingley's younger sister, and she wants Mr. Bingley to marry Georgiana Darcy, and she also wants to marry Mr. Darcy. That's why she tried to persuade her brother to marry Georgiana, and she tried to warn Jane indirectly that Jane is not suitable for Mr. Darcy by sending her a letter. And another character is Mr. Colin. Mr. Colin, during this chapter, he married to Carlos Lucas, and he is a well-connected person. And he's kind of annoying that every time that he talks to Elisabeth, she tries to ignore him. And he is a kind of self-important and proud person. For example, during the conversation between Jane and Elisabeth, Elisabeth said that I can't understand how Carlos could agree to marry such a self-important, proud and silly man. And another character is Carlos Lucas. Carlos Lucas, during this chapter, she married Mr. Colin and became Mrs. Colin. And she is Elisabeth's friend and also a kind of well-educated person. She is a kind of patient person. For example, she could listen to Mr. Colin talk while Elisabeth found it annoying. And she put a financial security about marital happiness. For example, on page 33, she said that although marriage might not bring happiness, but it was the only honorable way in which a well-educated woman with a little income could afford a home for herself. And another character is Sir William Lucas. Sir William Lucas is Carlot's father, and the next character is Maria. Maria is Carlot's sister. And the next character is Mr. George Vikkam. Mr. George Vikkam is a good-looking man, and he got help by Mr. Darcy's father to go to study at the university. And he is a kind of person that lack of moral. This is according to Mr. Darcy's letter to Elisabeth. And he is a kind of womanizer. For example, he tried to involve with Elisabeth, Georgiana Darcy, and also Miss King. And the last character is Miss King. Miss King is the woman that Mr. Vikkam transferred his affection to after Elisabeth. And she was inherited £10,000 from her relative. That's why Mr. Vikkam transferred his affection from Elisabeth to Miss King. And that's all for character analysis. Now let's move to the next part.
Good evening to the lecturer and hello everyone. My name is King Sunda. Yes, and now I would like to start my part. It's about vocabulary. So now I raise up for the 5 main points of the vocabulary. So the first word we call satirical. So satirical here it means the exposing of the human like folly to, or we can call ridiculous. Yes. So for example, he has a very satirical eye, and if I do not begin by being impertinent myself, so I shall soon grow afraid of him. So this sentence means that he has a very ridiculous eye or folly eye, so I need to act as the real of myself so that I shall soon grow afraid of him. Yes, so the next word is impertinent. So impertinent here it means improperly forward or bold. Yes. So I rest up. I just verify the same sentence of above that the main word is impertinent. Here it means like improperly. Yes. So the next word is felicity. So felicity here means the state of the well being characterized, yes, by contentment. Yeah. So for example, Mr. Philip visited them all, and this opened to his needs a source of felicity unknown before. So it means that Mr. Philip needs uh, they act as felicity to him, like unknown before. Yes. So the next word is entail. So entail here means the limit of the inheritance of the property to the specific heirs or specific of someone. Yeah. For example, Mr. Bennett's property consisted almost entirely in an estate of 2,000 a year. So, Vic, unfortunately for his daughters, was entailed in the default of heir male on distant relationship. So it means that the property of Mr. Bennett it is entirely entailed in the default of heir male that is on a distant relationship with him. Yeah. So the last word we call complacent. So complacent here means a tendency to try to please or yield to the will of others, or we can call to be dislike or uh, uninterested. Yeah. So for example, he is indeed, but considering the investment my dear Miss Eliza, we cannot wonder at his complacence, for who would object to such a partner. So the sentence means that Miss Elisa should try to motivate the man that he acts as dislike or not interested with her. So she should try to motivate him, yeah, to join as the partner of her. Yeah. So that's all for my part. Thank you everyone for your paying attention with me. Yeah. So let's move to the next presenter. Thank you.
First, I would like to pay respect to lecturer and hello my classmates. Today I'm gonna present about reflection. Don't waste any time, let's start our presentation. First, daughter has the right to oppose not to marry with someone, like Elisabeth refused to marry with Colin because she doesn't love him, and also because his behavior really proud, self-important, and a silly man. Anyway, because of his property, Mrs. Bennett really angry with Elisabeth. In Khmer culture, if we look at the past, we will see daughter has no right to choose a partner. Everything depends on their parents because they think they are a woman. They need to thank or grateful their parents by obedience. Refusing to marry with someone doesn't mean that we are ungrateful with our parents. There are a lot of ways to thank or grateful them. Anyway, I saw in the real life some parents force their daughter to marry with a rich man because of they are in debt. Nick family reputation in society. Reputation is really important for one society. If we behave inappropriately to society, that we will be ignored. Like Elisabeth family, I mean Bennett family, because their behavior such as cannot join with other people, made Dancy try to persuade his friend Bingley broken heart with Jane. I think that is a parent who manage a whole family should be blamed because they are a parent. They should role a good model for their children. However, Elisabeth is a good one, but people will judge a whole family. Nick, don't judge people too fast. Everyone don't live in the same house. You cannot judge other people by your way. Maybe someone says something to you, but it must through your consideration first before you believe it. Like Elisabeth Jane believed Vikkam without knowing him before and without us Dancy to be clear. In the end, she feel regret with what she have done or speak to Dancy. For the last one, don't decide to get married because you get old. It is really happen in the society and it's always happen to the women. Sometimes they get married just because they grow old and sometimes because they are afraid people speech. And one more thing, maybe they think it's really difficult to get a baby when they grow old. Like in the story, one reason in other reason that make Charlotte marry with Caroline because she already 27 years old and she like King Beauty, so she think that is a chance to marry with Caroline. Marry is not a chain but a choice. You need to choose someone who love you and you love them. It is a happiness. So that's all for my presentation.
Finger of speech often provide impassive presence of expression or clarity. Okay, finger of speech. There are 9 types of finger of speech. Number 1, imagery. Imagery describing writing that appeal to the senses such as sight, taste, touch, smell, and hearing. For example, Mr. Corin was speaking to her again on page 39. Oh, sorry, 38. Mrs. Bennett has been right in jury for the end of the interview on page 38. Mr. Bennett raised his eye from his book on page 39. Mr. Ducky is impatient to see her sister on page 41. Okay, next. Number two, similes. Similes compare the two analyzing using like or as. For example, I has nothing to complain of as she make no promise to me on page 45. Mr. Ducky looks as cool and broad as ever on page 53. I cannot play sing notes as well as some other women on page 55. Elisabeth experienced a variety of emotion as she read the letter. Okay, next. Number 3. Metaphor. Metaphor is similar the definition of simile, but there is one important difference between the two. Alliteration. Alliteration is the repetition of beginning consonant sounds such as ceiling, swim, where, swimming in the sea. Number 5, hyperbole. Hyperbole is a major exaggeration or overstatement. For example, I think I should state my reasons for marrying on page 36. We are also anxious to see her sister again on page 41. Although she always tried bravely to appear cheerful on page 450. Just imagine two of daughters was very close to marry And then nothing. I do not blame Jane, who would have to get Mr. Bicky if she could. But Licky's, oh, sister, it is hard to think on page 47. At this, sorry, a short distance, you say it is nearly 80 kilometers. Nobody else want to help me. Oh, how he'll feel and look at Lizzie now. She is so unconscious. Number 6. On metaphor. On metaphor is the word that sounds like its meaning. It can also be described as the use of a word that which imitate a sound. Number 7. Personification. Give humanity or charities to something that is not human, such as animal, objective, or non-living thing. Example, she feel a little less confident. Elisabeth felt herself growing more angry every moment. She had the doorbell ring, and know that mean a visitor has arrived. Mrs. Bennett greatly rang the bell, and the servant brought Elisabeth into the library. Okay, number 8. Metonymy definition: something is named to replace something closely related to it. Number 9. Synecdoche definition: the whole is replaced by the part. Okay, that's all. That's all for my point, and thank you teacher and thank you everyone for pay attention.